Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and welcome back to From the Editor's Desk, a podcast where we unpack some of the top stories which either have or will appear in Compliance Week, look at the weeks, or rather, some of the top compliance stories percolating around, talk some sports, and generally try to solve the world's problems. I'm your co host, Tom Fox.
I'm Kyle Brasseur, editor in chief at Compliance Week. Always a pleasure, Tom. We talk compliance, talk sports, the world. It's just another day in the life.
Just another day at the office. Kyle, what have you and your team been reporting on in March?
March has been busy. It always is. It always seems to be. A couple of weeks ago, that was just one of those weeks where it was really, it seemed like it was hitting on all ends. It started with, we cover a wide array of things at Compliance. We started with a court ruling that was calling into question the Treasury's beneficial ownership requirements. We've been really reporting on those for the last couple of years, and things finally hit the paper here at the start of this year, and now they're already in doubt whether it is constitutional or not. That was a pretty big curveball for a lot of people. And then a couple days later, the SEC finally passed its rule after 2 years since its proposal. And a couple days after that, we had the really big speeches from the DOJ. Obviously, the stuff that's out there is that they're looking to put together a whistleblower program similar to what is in place at the SEC and the CFTC, and also a little bit of a tease that there's going to be some compliance guidance tweaks coming to their TP regarding AI risk management. Again, it was one of those weeks where I look back on it on Friday, I was like, oh, man, there's a lot going on. It's exciting at this. You always want to lose.
What can you share with us the current series you have running by Ally McDevitt?
Oh yeah, that's a real big highlight for us as well. So that's not so much on the news front, but on the compliance week front. So for those of you who are familiar, we put together case studies each year where we really take a deep dive on some core compliance issues. And we've done these in the past on rebuilding corporate culture. We did that one with Volkswagen after their monitorship with the DOJ. We've done them on scope 3 emissions. We've done them on ransomware attacks and cyber attacks in general. So this one, we really want to focus in on something from a financial services background. That's where most of our readership is. It's a highly regulated industry. And so we homed in on the idea of doing a KYC and AML case study related to the management of Jeffrey Epstein as a client and the banks that managed him. So all the credit on that goes to our case study writer, Ally McDevitt. She was the one who came up with the idea, did all the research, conducted the interviews, and put together a really comprehensive 4-part report that aimed to shine a new light on an old story. Everyone obviously knows about Jeffrey Epstein and the sort of the horrors he carried out and all the things he did. But we want to take a look at and focus on the compliance takeaways related to the banks that were involved with Epstein. And that's what our case study looks to do. It really deep dives into some of the due diligence and onboarding issues that were at play with the financial institutions that Epstein banked at. And again, it really comprehensive and something that we're really proud of.
You and Allie both should be, and frankly, I was really thrilled to see this series. I found this story one of the most, if not disgusting, horrifying stories, but your perspective is exactly what I want our profession to look at and take away. In addition to the onboarding that you mentioned, it's really the management of a customer or potential customer or a client, and when do you stop doing due diligence? The answer is never. If information comes up, you need to evaluate it, and I really appreciated you guys bringing that angle to this story because as distasteful as that story has been, there is a lot for every compliance professional to unpack, and I think put directly into their compliance program, irrespective if they're regulated, if they're bank, energy, tech, whatever it may be. So kudos to you and your team, and frankly, I think that's part of the mission of Compliance Week,
Yeah,
to tell those stories.
100% is. And that's something we really take to heart. And I will say it's one of those stories where there was a lot of instances of compliance officers trying to do the right thing. And I think that's one of the things that really got lost in the shuffle here is there were people at the institutions who said, hey, this is wrong, or this is a problem, and this is something we need to do it about, but just didn't happen. It's important to call attention to those because I think a lot of compliance officers find themselves in those similar shoes. And really, it's something where they can learn from, okay, this is an example that I can use to show that if you ignore me, things can go terribly wrong.
So let me go back to a couple of the other stories you raised that you covered and really ask how you think through a story that perhaps not is not evolving, but it's clear there's going to be more to it. And I'm specifically talking about Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco's announcement of the whistleblower bounty program at the Department of Justice and her remarks around AI and where the DOJ was going. So we have a huge announcement, but that's really only the start. How are you guys gonna cover that going forward? And maybe we'll see something in April if there is additional information.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, it's you have to cover the information at first glance, and then we always take the approach of bringing that information back to the people that we know, the compliance officers that we connect with, and all that stuff, and getting an understanding as to okay, what does this mean to you, and then revisiting the story with that in mind. And so that's the approach that we take developments like that. With the case of the two things you mentioned, the whistleblower program and the AI developments with the ECC. I think for the AI, we had actually, it was ironic time when we had just done a survey that we conducted jointly with Navex in December. And we had data very recently that was about how compliance officers, the level of oversight that they have in AI decision business. And so we're able to take that data now and look at it within the context of, okay, we know the DOJ is about to change its guidance and establish compliance is responsible or the expectations of compliance and managing AI risk. And we also have data here that tells us how many compliance officers have a seat at the AI decision making table. How are these two things going to work? Is it empowered on AI decision making? How are they going to be able to successfully manage the risks? And so we're able to take those two things and explore it and solve those issues that kind of exist between those two juxtaposing data points. So that's how we're looking at that one and really being able to lean back on some of the data we gathered from that survey and also from our Inside the Mind of the CCO survey, which got where compliance officers at in their own use of AI. And then for the whistleblower program, one of the things we look at is how both sides of it react. Where we write for a compliance audience, we don't necessarily write for whistleblowers. These two things have to work hand in hand. Compliance officers need to understand whistleblowers and where they're coming from as part of their jobs. And so it's important that we pay attention to that. And one of the things I think is really fascinating about this DOJ program is the whistleblower community has expressed hesitancy toward it a little bit because of the way the DOJ has gone about whistleblower cases in the past. We don't know many details about the program. We don't know if it's going to offer anonymity like the SEC and CFTC. And we do know that the current sort of whistleblower regime at the DOJ, using the key TAM provisions of the False Claims Act, you don't get anonymity. You have to put yourself out there. And we also just had a tragedy that occurred with the Boeing whistleblower. And that goes to show of the risks that come in when you put yourself out there. And the stakes are high. And the stakes are always going to be high with the DOJ. We're not talking civil anymore. We're talking criminal cases. So that is higher stake, more stress on the individuals. A lot of stuff that really needs to be considered. So there's a lot of direction. And that's the way we look at these stories is we don't have all the information, but here's all the things that will be playing a factor in the what we get to at the end of the road.
Absolutely. I hope both of these stories are things that we can explore perhaps in person at Compliance Week 2024.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the things we always take advantage of what headlines and really try to be able to address it. That's what's top of mind at that moment in time. For us, it's nice the conference a couple weeks because we'll be able to really get at these while they're new and all the top people say.
College, I've been able to do a speaker series preview of the speakers at Compliance Week 2024. And so it's been great for me to hear about some of the topics and the breadth and scope of what Compliance Week will be putting out this year. But I wanted to ask you, are there any real highlights in your mind, or maybe even things you're really looking forward to hearing about or seeing at Compliance Week 2024?
Yeah, there's actually I wrote a piece about a month ago. It was 10 things I was looking forward to. So Tom, I can give you 10.
Give me
Uh,
10.
yeah, I know. For me, the conference is always a blur. It's my busiest days of the year, but it's also the most fun I have all year. And it's really a great opportunity for me to connect with so many people. That's what I look forward to the most is as much as I love a good agenda and all that stuff, it's the networking time and everything like that. But in terms of the sessions, some of the few that I'm looking forward to is we're doing the women's brunch on day one. And that's going to be married to a session on the path from chief compliance officer to the board. And that's something that I'm really interested been exploring right now because our Inside the Mind of the CCO survey data was what sort of indicated to us that this is a big aspiration for a lot of CCOs. And so I'm interested that it's a really strong panel of female speakers who have, some of which have made that transition. I'm really interested to hear from them. And I think that it's going to be really valuable to the audience because there are a lot of people who are maybe thinking about that next step. I've made it to CO. Where do I go from here? To be able to continue to carry the and push the compliance message. So I think that's going to be a really interesting session. And then some of the stuff we just talked about, we have keynotes on AI. We have keynotes on the DOJ and what they're doing on the enforcement front. I think a really great fireside chat that we're going to be having with Andy McBride, who is the former CCO at Albemarle. We all know that they've got their FCPA settlement's got a lot of attention. So it'll be great to hear from him on his experience as part of that and some of the lessons he learned. And so those are always, I think, really big highlights for myself. And I'm looking forward to it. I've also got a session as well where we'll be exploring in depth more of the data from the Inside the Mind surveys. I'll be looking forward to that opportunity as well.
Yeah, I wanna call out that Andy McBride interview, but for perhaps a different reason. I had the opportunity to visit with him on a podcast where he shared many of those things, and when you guys announced he was doing a fireside chat, I thought, "This is perfect. This is exactly what Compliance Week, the conference, is for, to have someone literally on the cutting edge of compliance." At that point, they were one of the most significant FCPA settlements in a very although the room will be large, those fireside chats are incredibly intimate. And I thought this is just the perfect way to complement what I've done and what he's done with several others in our space. So I wanted to give you guys a tip of the hat for having him for a fireside chat. I think it's going to be great. He is incredibly open and engaging about what he and his team did. So I know a lot of compliance professionals will learn quite a bit from that. But you've got a couple of other sessions where you go in a little bit different direction away from compliance. Could you tell us a little bit about those? I don't want to say away from compliance, but you bring innovative ideas for the compliance professional, I should have said.
Absolutely. And this is something we've experimented with the last couple of years and it's been well received. And that's why we continue. I think, and I'm not a compliance officer myself. So I'm only put myself in the shoes, but I imagine a lot of officers who come to our conferences are senior level. They're very established in their jobs. They've earned their position, worked in the roles for 15, 20 years. And so maybe a session on FCPA best practices or whatever, it might not quite resonate because they are the FCPA best practice. They've learned it through their own works. We try to take in sometimes to be able to cater to those individuals. And so one thing we did last year that we're doing this year is we had our opening keynote was all about neuroscience and basically how to manage productivity and maximize productivity while reducing the strain on yourself as an individual. And I think that's something that those individuals can take more from because they are in these high impact, high stress jobs, managing a lot of individuals, stakes are high. And we've tried to introduce that. Our first, it all started a couple years ago when we did our first like CCO thing because at that point, you get all the executives together, you get them in a room, it's Chatham House rules, and you really start to hear about what they struggle with the most in their job. And oftentimes it's really personal aspects of the roles, the soft skills or whatever it might be. And so we're trying to create sessions that cater to that part of the conversation a little bit more. So we do have a workshop on one of this year's event that's all going about neuroscience once again. We have sessions that are a little bit more focused on career development, fraud detection through reading body language. All of these, like you said, they're a little bit atypical in some ways. But I think that's what we're trying to offer is different viewpoints that can help inform individuals that might already know the fundamentals really well or whatever it might be. I think we hear a lot of talk about behavioral science and some of these things and how they impact compliance. I think there's a lot of interest there from a lot of executives who are really trying to learn more about those things and what they might be able to do with their program to innovate and stay ahead of the curve. So that's what we're trying to offer with those.
Kyle, I'd like to turn to our section where we generally save the world through sports.
Every
And
time.
every time we're recording this on Thursday, March 21, which happens to be the opening day of March Madness. And I'm not sure I've really visited with you about college basketball very much. What's March Madness mean to you?
Yeah, you haven't visited with me on college basketball from college basketball is really you keep corner on March Madness each year. I just love the drama of sports. That's one of the best things that sports offers. These fun stories, these underdogs or whatever it might be. And I can't imagine a better forum market than this because you have everything so clearly documented. No matter of, oh, this is the division series and these two teams are even here. You've got seeds and you're very clear of who was favored and who isn't. And it creates such a great narrative. Every year when March Madness comes around, I really appreciate the upsets and the things that come out of the woodwork that you don't quite expect, or those last second wins or whatever it might be. But that's it. I don't do brackets because it would be a disaster. I once did one when I worked and I just based on which teams have my favorite logos because I don't follow college football during the year. But I do keep an eye out during March Madness. It's just fun. It's theater to me.
Yeah, I agree with all of those things, and I don't think my bracket's busted yet, so that's impressive for me on the first
Hold it
round.
on. 4
Yeah,
hours in,
hold
you're doing okay.
4 hours in, I haven't lost everything yet. The other thing, though, that I did wanna explore with you, and this might be more challenging because of your background or lack thereof in college sports, is up until probably in my mid-40s or even early 50s, I religiously followed college basketball. And I knew the players, I knew the coaches, I watched games during the season, and I don't know if it's my advanced age or if it's the changes in college basketball, but I don't have that passion for the season. Hence, I know nothing about any of the teams except that there are 3 from Texas or 4 from Texas in there, so they got picked by
Or
me. Did you watch national college basketball growing up, even though the Boston teams rarely make it this far?
no, not really. I think a lot of it always comes from you're a product of really what's around you and where you're raised and all. And Tom, you're from Texas. Texas, I've always heard high school football is bigger than NFL for a lot of Texas teams. And
It is.
that's not a in a lot of parts of countries. It's always a matter of what your background is and that shapes your perspective. For me, it never really quite clicked, and I watched NBA, paid close attention to the Celtics and all the teams that were playing around that time, but I never really paid close attention to college. I also think I probably would have got as a sports junkie, would have gotten into if I went to a college that was active on the sports scene, and I most definitely did not go to a college that was active on the sports scene. I went to Emerson, where you can buy a shirt that says Emerson College Football undefeated since 1886 because we've never had a football team, and our most successful team in my time there was our Quidditch team. I think I just kind of I missed the boat on that. Also. Although I did do some college basketball broadcasting in college. Quite fun.
You may be the first person in 5,000 podcasts to reference Harry Potter. Well done.
I can't even believe that. Unfathomable.
Well,
Not even lying though. Emerson had a great
I
Quidditch team in my time
it's
there.
I know you're
Very,
not
very
lying. It's
competitive
just
with anyone.
we're Star Trek, Star Wars, MCU kind of folks. So well done. My wife will be proud. Let's turn to something I know you know something about, and that's Major League Baseball.
Absolutely.
We've got next week of season openers. My wife and I will attend our 16th straight season opener, I think. We love the first game. It's just magical. Everything's possible. The season's in front of you. But I wanted to start with one positive thing. I may end with something less positive, but the positive thing was last year after the season opener, what I text every one of my friends about was the following. The game took 2 hours and 36 minutes. And I didn't believe a pitch count or pitch clock would work. I saw it work in live, real time. And that really led, I think, to, if not a full renaissance, maybe a mini renaissance of baseball last year because you could actually watch a game. And I'm fully engaged anyway, but I was more engaged because literally I could be in bed by 9 or 10. And so I wanted to start with that, but tell us about the Red Sox, how you're feeling right now.
Dom, the 2 hour game is alluring to me right now. The Red Sox are opening in Seattle, and that game starts at 10 p.m. my time. And I'm in bed by 8 o'clock kind of. Even if the reverse in 2 hours, I still wouldn't be able to sleep for it. Now, it goes to show why they needed to make this change. Is baseball's always faced the issues of the game being too long or the game not being quite accessible based on where it is and broadcast disputes and all of that stuff has really created a lot of problems for baseball. to be able to grow its fan base. And so they made those changes for that reason. And it was great to see the payoff last year. I do think a lot more people were attending games and staying through it just because you got out at a more reasonable. But in terms of the Red Sox, not looking great. I think that one of the key sort of themes of this baseball offseason was that the big spenders weren't spending. And that's what we're now seeing a lot of the liberation between the unions and everything like that related to that. And the Red Sox were among them, and they had a lot of holes to fill, and they didn't quite spend to fill those. So we don't think I'm overly optimistic. I've also seen this team corral together under absurd circumstances before. We are the team that had the joy of going from worst to first to worst and winning a World Series in the middle of that as well. So you never really quite know how they bounce back. I would say the optimism isn't too high around here in Boston. I think there's a lot of attention being paid to. You've got the Celtics who are doing as well as they're doing, and the Bruins who are doing as well as they're doing. And the Patriots are an absolute question mark. It might be one of those years where the Red Sox are falling under the radar a little.
Where do the Red Sox stand in the 4 major sports, professional sports leagues in Boston of basketball, football, hockey, and baseball? What number are they?
Yes, and I can actually give you data on this because I worked ESPN Boston and I covered all 4 of these sports. So the most popular is football, unsurprisingly. I think New England also, it's more than just Boston. It's spread out throughout the region. So there's a lot more interest in what's going on there beyond Boston. And then the Red Sox are typically number 2. That said, though, when the Bruins are going well or when the Celtics are going well, those dynamics can really shift. And I think at its core, as someone who's lived in Boston for a decade and grew up in Massachusetts, I found Boston wants a hockey city more. When the Bruins are in the playoffs, the energy is so far and away different. You think the Red Sox, there's a romantic aspect to it, a little bit more of a reserved feel towards of excitement. When the Bruins are going really well and they're in the playoffs, is something so dynamic. And I've had the luxury of being to many live sports events. And without a doubt, the one that stands out in my mind the most was Bruins Canadians game 7 of the playoffs in the year that they won the Stanley Cup back in, I think it was 2010, 2011. I think that's indicative of the type of city that Boston strives to be. But it all depends on how the team's doing, which they're doing quite well this year. So I think we'll see that come through.
Kyle, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. We're going to link to Compliance Week 2024 in the show notes. I hope you will consider joining Kyle and I in Washington, D.C. starting April 2nd. I am your co host, Tom Fox.
Now I'm Kyle Brasseur. Thanks for having me, Tom. And if you're listening, forward to seeing you there in DC.